I drove through the heavy snow to reach the estate 2 hours early, desperate to finally be helpful. Standing in the cold hallway, I froze when a voice behind the locked library door mentioned my name. I thought they only hated my background, but then I saw the gift box with the red bow. Inside was not a present, but the evidence meant to frame me. Tonight was not about Christmas celebration. It was about my total destruction. My name is Brianna Hart, and at 32 years old, I still felt like a child trying to sit at the adults' table whenever I visited my in-laws. The windshield wipers of my sedan slapped rhythmically against the heavy, wet snow that battered the glass. It was a brutal Wisconsin afternoon. The heater was cranked up to the highest setting, yet I could not stop shivering. I was driving toward the Caldwell estate in the affluent suburbs of Milwaukee, and according to the dashboard clock, I was exactly 2 hours early. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. This was a calculated move. For the past year, every family gathering had ended with me standing awkwardly in the corner while Marlene, my mother-in-law, made subtle jabs about my lack of pedigree. Today, I wanted to change the narrative. If I arrived before the guests, before the caterers, and before the chaos, I could help set the table. I could be useful. I could prove that I belonged here, even if my blood was not blue enough for their standards. Just breathe. Brianna, I whispered to myself in the empty car. You manage risk for a living. You can handle a dinner party. I worked as a risk control manager at Northbridge Ledger Works. My entire career was built on analyzing threats, calculating probabilities, and preventing disasters before they happened. I was comfortable with spreadsheets. I understood the language of loss and profit, but the Caldwells did not operate on logic. They operated on a complex social code that I could never seem to crack. I remembered the last time I tried to help Marlene in the kitchen. She had laughed, a sound that was light and sharp like breaking glass. "Oh, darling," she had said, patting my hand with pity. "You do not need to worry about the china. I know you are not used to handling things of such value. We would not want an accident. Would we?" She always made it sound like a joke. She framed my middle-class upbringing as a handicap I was bravely overcoming. To them, I was the variable that did not fit the equation, the woman who had somehow tricked their golden son, Ethan, into marriage. I pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching over the fresh layer of white powder. The house stood imposing and gray against the winter sky. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress designed to keep people like me out. I parked and grabbed the spare key Ethan had given me just days ago. He had insisted I come early to help with the logistics. I unlocked the heavy front door and stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit me instantly, carrying the scent of pine needles and expensive beeswax polish. The foyer was magnificent. A 12-foot Christmas tree dominated the space, draped in gold ribbons and crystal ornaments that caught the light of the chandelier. But despite the festive decorations, the house felt sterile. It was quiet. It was too perfect. It felt like a museum exhibit where the velvet ropes had just been removed. I began to unbutton my coat, prepared to call out a greeting, when I heard voices. They were drifting from the library down the long hallway. I recognized the deep, booming laugh of Grant, my father-in-law. Then came Marlene's voice, murmuring something I could not quite catch. And then a third voice joined them. "She will be here any minute," the voice said. "We need to have everything in place." I froze. That was Ethan. My eyes darted to the antique bench near the closet. There, thrown carelessly over the armrest, was Ethan's dark wool coat. I walked over and touched the fabric. It was dry. He had been here for hours. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and looked at the text message he had sent me 45 minutes ago. "Stuck in a meeting with the partners. Traffic is going to be a nightmare. You go ahead. I will be there as soon as I can." He had lied. He was not at the office. He was here, behind closed doors, with his parents. I moved deeper into the foyer, my footsteps silent on the marble floor. On the console table, right next to a silver tray of untouched mail, sat a thick, cream envelope. It looked official. My name was printed on the front in stark, black block letters. Brianna! I stepped closer. Beneath my name, someone had written a note in blue ink sign before guests arrive. I reached for the envelope, my fingers trembling slightly. But before I could pick it up, the voices in the library grew louder. The heavy oak door was not fully latched. Through the crack, the sound carried clearly into the silent hall. "Are you sure she will not read it?" Marlene asked. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "She trusts me," Ethan replied. His tone was dismissive, almost bored. "She never reads the fine print when I hand it to her." My hand retracted as if the envelope were burning. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. The risk manager in me took over, overriding the hurt wife. This was a setup, the lie about his location, the envelope waiting like a trap, the secret meeting. I looked at the closed library door, then back at the envelope. They were running a scenario, and I was the target. I needed to know the potential fallout. I needed to assess the damage before impact. I took a slow, deliberate breath and crept toward the library door, straining my ears to hear every word. I stood outside the library door, my hand hovering over the cold brass knob, and my mind drifted back to the beginning. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 3 years. I met Ethan at a charity fundraiser where the champagne flowed like water and the air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. He had looked at me with a warmth that melted my defenses. He had seemed different from the rest of his family. "I come from a traditional family. Brianna," he had told me that night, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back. "They can be intense, but with me, you will always be safe. I protect what is mine." I fell for it. I fell for the suit, the smile, and the promise of safety. But after the wedding, I quickly learned that traditional was just a polite code word for silence. In the Caldwell dynasty, a wife was not a partner. She was a prop. I was expected to stand in the background, smile at the right moments, and be eternally grateful that they had allowed a risk manager from a middle-class background to carry their last name. Whenever Marlene made one of her cutting remarks about my clothes or my job, I would look to Ethan for support. I wanted him to be the shield he promised to be. Instead, he would squeeze my shoulder and whisper the same tired excuse later in the car. "You are being too sensitive." "Brianna," he would say, shaking his head as if I were a confused child. "Mom didn't mean it that way. She is just trying to help you fit in. Why do you always have to make things difficult?" He turned every cut into a scratch I had inflicted on myself. I started to believe him. I started to think I was the problem. But recently, the uneasiness had shifted from emotional to professional. 2 months ago, my department at Northbridge Ledger Works was hit with a surprise internal audit. The compliance officers were flagging unusual activity, specifically regarding external vendor approvals. It was strange. I was meticulous. I never made mistakes. Yet. The timing of the audit coincided perfectly with the week Marlene had practically forced me to join the board of the Caldwell Family Charity Foundation. "It is time you did something useful for the family legacy," she had sniffed. Then came the questions. Over Sunday dinners, amidst the clinking of silver forks, Marlene would probe into my work life with a sudden, intense curiosity. "It must be so powerful," she had said one evening, pouring me a glass of wine I did not want. "Having access to all those system overrides at your firm. Tell me, Brianna, do you bring your laptop home? Perhaps we could look at the charity figures together on a secure server." I had laughed it off then, but the hair on the back of my neck had stood up. Then there was Grant. My father-in-law loved to boast about his business acumen. He talked loudly about real estate deals and massive acquisitions, but whenever I asked a specific question, A simple inquiry about yield rates or liability coverage, his eyes would go flat. "Don't bore your pretty head with the technical details, sweetheart," he would say with a dismissive chuckle. "It is just bricks and mortar. You stick to your little spreadsheets at work." But I did stick to my spreadsheets. That was the problem. I had started keeping a mental ledger of the Caldwell empire, and the numbers were bleeding red. I noticed the little things first. The staff at their country club whispering about late paychecks, the strange invoices lying around the house from shell companies with addresses that turned out to be empty lots, the charitable donations that seemed to circle back into accounts controlled by Grant's friends. I had kept these observations to myself. I was terrified that if I spoke up, Ethan would accuse me of being paranoid again. I was afraid of losing him. I remembered my mother's voice, trembling over the phone when I told her about my first fight with Marlene. "Be careful, baby," she had warned me. "You can fight a man, but don't fight a whole family alone. You will lose. They have money to bury the truth, and they will bury you with it." So I stayed silent. I played the role of the dumb, grateful wife. But standing here now in the hallway, staring at the envelope that demanded my signature before the guests arrived, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together with violent clarity. The audit at my job, the sudden inclusion in the charity board, Marlene's interest in my security clearance, Ethan's absence. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I was not just a guest at this party. I was not even family. I was a scapegoat. They had not invited me here early to help decorate the tree. They had lured me here to close the loop on a scheme I was only just beginning to understand. I looked at the library door again. I had walked right into the slaughterhouse, and I had even brought my own key. The gap between the heavy oak door and the frame was no wider than a coin, but it was enough to let the poison seep out. I held my breath, my ear pressed against the cold wood as Marlene's voice drifted into the hallway. It was not the high-pitched, fake cheerful tone she used when guests were present. It was low, flat, and terrified me more than any scream could have. "Tonight, we wrap it up," she said. "I want this finished before the roast is even served. After Christmas. She is gone from the Caldwell name. I am tired of looking at her." My stomach dropped. I had expected insults. I had expected them to complain about my outfit or my manners. I had not expected an expiration date. Then Grant spoke. His voice was accompanied by the sound of ice clinking against a crystal glass. "The accounts are ready. The transfer channels are open for the next 3 hours. All we need is her signature, and a witness to make it stick." I squeezed my eyes shut. Signature. The word hung in the air like smoke. "Don't worry," a third voice said. It was soft, familiar, and devastating. It was Ethan. "She will sign. She trusts me." I told her it is just tax paperwork for the foundation. A wave of nausea crashed over me, so violent I had to cover my mouth to stop from gagging. "She trusts me." He said it not with regret, but with the cold assurance of a man betting on a sure thing. He was right. I did trust him. I had trusted him with my life, and he was using that trust as a weapon to sever me from his life. I looked down at the cream envelope sitting on the console table just a few feet away. The note sign before guests arrive suddenly took on a sinister meaning. It was not a request. It was a command. It was the final nail in a coffin I did not even know they had built. I needed to get away from the door. If they opened it now, if they saw me standing there, I did not know what they would do. I took a shaky step backward, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. In my panic, my boot caught the edge of a large, perfectly wrapped gift box sitting beneath the towering Christmas tree. Thud. The impact was soft, but the sound that came from inside the box was not. It was a sharp, heavy clank, metal striking metal. It did not sound like a sweater or a purse. It sounded industrial. I froze, glancing at the library door. The voices continued, uninterrupted. They had not heard, driven by an instinct I could not name. I knelt down. The box was wrapped in silver paper with a massive red velvet bow. There was no tag, no "to Brianna" or "from Santa." I slid my finger under the tape, carefully peeling back the corner of the wrapping. I lifted the lid just an inch. It was not a gift. Nestled in black foam was a heavy steel embossing seal, the kind used to authenticate corporate documents. Next to it was a silver USB drive. My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached in and picked up the drive. A small strip of masking tape was stuck to the side. The handwriting was Grant's, jagged and rushed Northbridge transfer logs. My blood ran cold. Northbridge was my company. Why did my father-in-law have a copy of my company's transfer logs in a gift box under his Christmas tree? And why did he have a corporate seal? I looked at the seal again. I turned it over to see the die plate. It was not the Caldwell Foundation seal. It was the corporate seal for a shell company I had flagged in my risk reports 2 weeks ago. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They were not just divorcing me, they were framing me. They were going to use my credentials, my signature, and this equipment to authorize a fraudulent transfer, and then they were going to plant the evidence on me. The gift was meant to be found in my possession. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the drive back into the box. I took one last, terrifying glance through the crack in the library door. From this angle, I could see the edge of Grant's mahogany desk. Lying on top of a stack of folders was a printed sheet of paper. It looked like a screenshot of an email. I squinted, focusing on the bottom of the page. Even from this distance, the bold signature block was unmistakable. Sincerely, Brianna Hart Risk Control Manager, Northbridge Ledger Works. I stared at it, horror flooding my veins. I had never written that email. I had never seen that document. But there it was, printed and ready, waiting in the room where my husband and his parents were drinking scotch and planning my destruction. They had already stolen my identity. Now, they were just waiting for me to walk in and take the fall. The panic that had threatened to crush my lungs a moment ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was the mechanism of survival I had honed over 7 years in risk management. When a crisis hit, you did not scream. You documented. I pulled my phone from my pocket and ensured the switch was set to silent. My hands, which had been trembling, were now steady. I snapped a photo of the silver box with the red bow. I took a close-up of the USB drive, ensuring the handwritten label, Northbridge Transfer Logs, was legible. I photographed the heavy steel corporate seal, capturing the die plate that would prove it was a forgery tool. Then, I took a picture of the cream envelope on the console table with the instruction to sign before guests arrived. I needed a safe place to review the documents, and I needed power. The battery icon on my phone was red, hovering at 12%. I slipped the envelope under my coat and walked briskly toward the kitchen. The catering staff had not arrived yet, so the cavernous room was empty. I plugged my phone into an outlet hidden behind the coffee maker and leaned against the marble counter, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. With the phone charging, I tore open the envelope. The papers inside were heavy, high-quality bond. I scanned them rapidly, my eyes searching for keywords. It was a power of attorney granting Ethan full control over my legal and financial decisions. Beneath that was a document titled Asset Transfer Consent. The language was dense and intentionally vague, filled with loopholes that a layman would miss but a professional would spot immediately. I flipped to the last page and found an addendum. Brianna Hart, hereby voluntarily dissolve my marital rights and waive any claim to the Caldwell estate or assets, effective immediately upon signature. Below, it was a blank space for a notary seal. I stared at the paper, feeling a phantom ache in my chest. I remembered the conversation from 3 days ago. Ethan had kissed my forehead, his eyes soft and convincing. It is just some tax paperwork for the foundation. Babe, he had said, The accountants need to clear up some liability issues before the fiscal year ends. It is boring stuff, but it helps the family. I trust you, I had replied. I wanted to vomit. I had agreed to come early today to sign my own death warrant. I grabbed my phone. I could not do this alone. I opened my messages and found Tessa Vaughn. She was my best friend and the most vicious divorce attorney in the state. I selected the photos I had just taken the forgery kit, the transfer logs, the deceptive legal papers, and hit send. I typed a single message: if I disappear from this marriage. This is why. Do not call me yet. Just save these. My thumb hovered over the emergency call button. The instinct to call the police was overwhelming, but I stopped myself. If I called them now, what would they see? A wife snooping in her in-laws' gifts. Ethan would spin it. He would say I was unstable. He would say I planted the drive. Marlene would cry. Grant would call the chief of police, who was likely on his payroll. They were setting me up to look like a criminal who had confessed. If I panicked, I played right into their script. I needed to know the full scope of the narrative they were building. I left the kitchen and crept down the service hallway toward Grant's private office. The door was ajar. I knew they were still in the library on the other side of the house, celebrating their cleverness. I slipped inside. The room smelled of toner and ozone. The laser printer in the corner was whirring softly, the fan still cooling down. It had just been used. I walked over and looked at the output tray. There was a single sheet of paper face down. I turned it over. It was a draft document titled Media Strategy Crisis Management for Brianna Hart Employee Fraud Scandal. I read the bullet points, and the blood drained from my face. Step 1. Leak internal audit findings to business press. Step 2. Family statement expressing shock and sadness at daughter-in-law's betrayal. Step 3. Ethan files for annulment based on criminal deception. This was not a reaction to a mistake I made. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision because they disliked me. This was a premeditated assassination of my character. They had been planning this for months. They had written the press release before I had even been accused. You monsters, I whispered to the empty room. I realized then that I was not just fighting for my marriage or my reputation. I was fighting for my freedom. If I signed those papers, I would be destitute. If I didn't, they would send me to prison for fraud. I heard the front door chime echo through the house. The first guests were arriving. I put the paper back exactly as I found it and backed out of the office. The game had started, and I was the only one who knew the rules had changed. My phone vibrated against my palm, a short, sharp buzz that felt like a lifeline. It was Tessa. I brought the phone to my ear, keeping my voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell me you are somewhere safe," Tessa said, her voice tight with professional urgency. "I am in the kitchen," I replied, checking the doorway to ensure the coast was clear. "They are still in the library. Tessa, they have a media plan drafted. They are going to frame me for fraud." "Listen to me very carefully, Brianna," Tessa commanded. "Do not sign anything. Do not confront them yet. If you scream now, it is your word against 3 people who have had months to rehearse their story. You need leverage. You need an independent witness. A witness I asked. Yes. Someone who isn't family. Someone who isn't on their payroll. Get someone in that house right now. And Brianna, save everything." I ended the call and took a deep breath. The fear was still there, sitting heavy in my stomach, but it was being pushed down by a cold, hard resolve. I was done being the victim. If they wanted a show, I would give them a performance they would never forget. I would turn this Christmas party into a crime scene, and I would make sure they were the ones holding the smoking gun. I needed eyes and ears. I pulled up my contacts and found June's number. June was the Caldwells' next-door neighbor, a sweet, chatty woman who loved gossip but hated injustice. She had always been kind to me. "Hey, June," I said, forcing a bright, cheerful tone into my voice as she picked up. "I know this is last minute, but Marlene is in a bit of a state with the decorations. Could you possibly pop over early? We could really use your artistic eye." "Oh, you poor dear," June exclaimed. "I will be there in 5 minutes. I have a bottle of wine that needs opening anyway. One variable secured. Now I needed to capture the truth." I reached into my purse and pulled out my old work phone, which I kept as a backup. I navigated to the voice memo app and hit the red record button. Moving silently back into the hallway, I slipped the phone into the inside pocket of my beige trench coat, which was hanging on the rack directly outside the library door. The microphone was positioned perfectly to pick up any conversation drifting through the wood. Then, I initiated the digital kill switch, using my personal smartphone. I drafted an email to the compliance department at Northbridge Ledger Works. My fingers flew across the screen. Subject: urgent security alert. Potential identity theft. To whom it may concern, I have reason to believe my digital signature and internal credentials have been compromised. Please lock my access immediately and flag any transactions attempted after 4:15 this afternoon as fraudulent. This is a protective measure. I hit send. Then, I logged into the company portal one last time. I changed my password to a string of random characters, enabled two-factor authentication, and took a screenshot of the confirmation screen. The timestamp read 4:16 in the afternoon. I stared at the image. This was my shield. If Grant or Ethan tried to execute a transfer tonight, the system would either block them or the logs would show that the transaction occurred after I had reported the security breach. I had just created a forensic timeline that proved my innocence. I mentally reviewed my arsenal. I had the photos of the forgery kit. I had the USB drive details. I had the draft of the media smear campaign. I had the unsigned legal trap in my pocket. And in a few minutes, I would have June. The plan formed clearly in my mind. I would not hide. I would not run. I would walk right up to that envelope, feign ignorance, and ask questions. I would act like the naive, trusting wife they thought I was. I would draw them out. I would make them say the quiet parts out loud, right in front of June. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were steady. I do not need them to apologize. I thought, the words echoing in my mind like a vow. I do not want their regret. I want to make sure they can never touch my life again. I smoothed my hair, put on my best holiday smile, and turned to face the door just as the bell rang. June was here. It was showtime, by 5 o'clock. The driveway was packed with luxury sedans. The house, previously a cold fortress, was now buzzing with the performative joy of the season. Grant's business partners, distant cousins with trust funds, and the board members of the charity foundation flooded the hallway. They shook the snow off their cashmere coats and marveled at the tree, completely unaware that they were walking onto a stage set for a crime. Marlene was in her element. She glided through the crowd in a crimson dress, playing the role of the benevolent matriarch to perfection. When she saw me standing near the staircase, she did not scowl. Instead, she rushed over and pulled me into a suffocating embrace, holding me tight enough to bruise. "Everyone, look at our beautiful Brianna," she announced, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "We are so lucky to have her." The crowd murmured their approval. I smiled back, feeling the coldness of her diamond necklace pressing against my skin. It was a masterclass in manipulation. If I caused a scene later, everyone would remember this moment. They would remember how much she loved me, and how unstable I must be to hurt such a kind woman. As soon as Marlene released me, Ethan appeared at my elbow. His grip on my arm was firm, guiding me away from the main group toward a quiet alcove near the library. "Babe, we really need to get that signature," he whispered, his eyes darting around the room to ensure no one was listening. "Just sign it quickly. Do not make Mom difficult. You know how she gets when things are not perfect on Christmas." He was using my empathy against me, just like he always did. But the woman who would have apologized and signed blindly was gone. I looked at him, widening my eyes in feigned innocence. Of course. Ethan, I want to help, but since it is a legal document regarding assets, we need a witness. I asked June to verify the signature. It is just proper procedure. Ethan's left eye twitched. It was a tiny spasm, but to me, it looked like a crack in a windshield. June, why would you involve the neighbor? Oh, here she is, I exclaimed, waving my hand. June bustled in from the kitchen, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres she had helpfully started passing around. She was beaming, rosy-cheeked, and utterly oblivious to the tension radiating off my husband. Merry Christmas. Ethan June chirped. Your wife is such a darling for inviting me over to help. Ethan forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. He could not yell at me now. He could not force me to sign in secret. I had brought the audience into the theater. Grant appeared next, holding 2 tumblers of amber liquid. He thrust one into my hand. Drink up. Brianna, he boomed, his voice a little too loud. It is single malt. It will help you. Relax. Make the evening go smoother. I took the glass. I knew exactly why he wanted me to drink. A tipsy woman is easier to manipulate. A drunk woman is easier to discredit. I raised the glass to my lips, letting the fumes hit my nose. But I did not swallow a drop. When Grant turned to greet a senator who had just walked in, I poured the entire contents into the soil of a large potted fern behind me. I walked over to the group Grant was entertaining. Marlene was there, too. Work has been so stressful lately, I said, pitching my voice to carry just enough for them to hear. Actually, it is funny you mentioned the business. Grant. Northbridge actually locked my system access this afternoon. Can you believe it must be a glitch? The reaction was instantaneous. Grant's hand froze in the middle of a gesture. Marlene's smile stayed fixed on her face, but her eyes went dead. For half a second, the mask slipped. They were terrified. They knew that if my access was locked, their plan to transfer the funds using my credentials was in jeopardy. Grant excused himself abruptly, muttering something about checking the wine cellar. I watched him go. He did not go to the cellar. He went straight to the library. I followed at a distance, stopping just outside the open door. Grant was hunched over his laptop on the desk. On the screen, I saw the familiar interface of an offshore banking portal. He was frantically clicking, trying to push something through. When he sensed someone behind him, he slammed the laptop shut, his face flushed with anger. Just checking the charity donation logs, he stammered, smoothing his tie. I returned to the party, my heart pounding but my face calm. Pastor Miller, the head of the charity fund, approached me with a warm smile. It is good to see you, Brianna, he said, shaking my hand. Grant tells me you are handling the compliance for the new endowment. It is reassuring to have someone with such high professional ethics overseeing the money. I looked across the room at Marlene. She was watching us, her jaw set so tight I could see the muscles working beneath her skin. Thank you, Pastor, I replied, holding Marlene's gaze. You have no idea how seriously I take my job. Accuracy is everything. Marlene took a sip of her wine, her knuckles white around the stem of the glass. The trap was set, but she was starting to realize that she might be the one standing on the release plate. The noise of the party faded instantly as Ethan dragged me up the grand staircase. His grip on my wrist was tight, bruising, no longer the gentle hold of a lover, but the shackle of a jailer. He pulled me into the master bedroom and slammed the door shut. The click of the lock turning was the loudest sound in the world. When he turned to face me, the mask was gone. The charming, slightly beleaguered husband I had seen downstairs had vanished. In his place was a stranger with cold, dead eyes. Stop the games. Brianna, he said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register I had never heard before. You are embarrassing us downstairs. You need to sign the papers. Now. I rubbed my wrist, backing away until my legs hit the edge of the bed. I am just trying to be careful. Ethan. Why are you acting like this? He paced across the room, running a hand through his hair. Just sign, and everything settles down. You do not understand what the family needs right now. We are bleeding. Brianna, we need to stop the hemorrhage. I looked at him, searching for a trace of the man I married. Do you love me, or do you love the Caldwell name? The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. He did not blink. He did not rush to reassure me. He just looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, and that silence broke my heart more than any scream could have. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was not the vague power of attorney from downstairs. This was different. He tossed it onto the bedspread between us. This is a post-nuptial agreement, he said flatly. I have already signed it. It states that we are separating due to irreconcilable differences regarding your financial misconduct. My breath hitched. Misconduct. If you sign this and the transfer authorizations, we let you walk away, he continued, his voice devoid of emotion. We will handle the fallout quietly. But if you do not sign, we release the internal audit to the press tomorrow morning. The headline will be about how Brianna Hart embezzled $3 million from the Caldwell Charity Fund to pay off her gambling debts. We have the paper trail to prove it. Or rather, we have created it. Terror washed over me, but my hand instinctively went to my pocket. I felt the cool metal of my phone. I pressed the record button on the side without taking it out. Ethan, I said, letting my voice tremble, playing the part of the terrified wife. Please. I do not understand. Why are you doing this to me? Why am I being forced to sign? He stepped closer, looming over me. Because someone has to go down for the missing money. Brianna, it cannot be my father. It cannot be me. You will take the blame for the fund. You are an outsider. I cannot lose my name. You can start over somewhere else. We can't. There it was. The confession. The admission that I was nothing more than livestock raised for slaughter. My pocket buzzed against my hip. I risked a glance down. It was a text from Tessa. Don't be alone. Get a third party now. He is dangerous when he is cornered. The realization hit me like a splash of ice water. I was locked in a room with a man who was desperate to save his own skin. If I refused to sign, he might not just threaten me legally. He might try to force my hand physically. I needed to break the seal of this room. I let out a ragged gasp, clutching my chest. I cannot breathe. Ethan, please. He rolled his eyes. Don't be dramatic. I lunged for the door. I threw the lock and ripped it open before he could grab me, stumbling out into the hallway. I spotted June coming up the stairs with a coat in her hand. June. I cried out, my voice shrill and echoing off the high ceilings. Please, I am having a panic attack. I need air. Ethan appeared in the doorway behind me instantly. His face shifted in a millisecond from menacing to concerned. Honey, it is okay. I have got you. No, I grabbed June's arm, pulling her between us. I need a witness. I feel like I am going to faint. June looked alarmed, patting my hand. Oh my goodness, Brianna. Sit down right here. Ethan, get her some water. Ethan stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. He could not touch me. Not with June standing right there, clucking over me like a mother hen. He was trapped by his own need for public perfection. Then, a shadow fell over us. I looked up to the top of the stairs. Marlene was standing there. She had been watching the whole time. She did not look worried. She looked disappointed. She walked down the steps slowly, her eyes locking onto mine with a chilling calmness. She leaned in close, ignoring June completely, and whispered words meant only for me. You are making this very messy. Brianna, she said softly. A good daughter-in-law knows how to sacrifice for the greater good. I stared at her, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was not just a crime. It was a ritual. They were not just stealing money. They were purifying their house, and I was the sin eater they intended to cast out into the wilderness. But they had forgotten one thing. The sin eater had teeth. I smoothed my skirt and descended the final few steps of the grand staircase. My heart was no longer racing. It had slowed to a heavy, deliberate rhythm, like a war drum. I walked straight into the center of the living room, right in front of the fireplace where the stockings hung in a mocking row of domestic perfection. Excuse me, everyone I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through the hum of conversation and the soft jazz playing in the background. Could I have your attention for a moment, since we are all here to celebrate the charity fund? I think it is important we have some transparency regarding the paperwork I was asked to sign tonight. The room went quiet, glasses lowered, heads turned. Marlene, who had been holding court near the punch bowl, froze. She recovered instantly, rushing toward me with a tight, dangerous smile. "Brianna, darling," she hissed, reaching out to grab my arm. "You are tired. Let's go to the kitchen and get you some water." I took a sharp step back. I looked directly at Pastor Miller, who was standing near the piano. "Pastor," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You manage the oversight for the fund. Is it standard procedure for a board member to be forced to sign legal documents in a locked bedroom during a Christmas party?" The pastor blinked, confused. Well, no, certainly not. All documents should be reviewed by counsel." Marlene stopped in her tracks. She could not physically drag me away now without confirming the suspicion I had just planted. I held up the crumpled envelope. This contains a request for me to voluntarily give up my marital rights and a power of attorney granting Ethan control over my assets. They told me it was tax forms. But when I read it, I realized it was a confession. Grant pushed his way through the crowd. His face flushed a deep, ugly red. He laughed, but it sounded like a bark. "Oh, for heaven's sake! This is a misunderstanding. Brianna is confused. She has been under a lot of stress at work. It is just a draft. A joke, really." It was not a joke. The voice came from behind me. It was June. My neighbor stood by the stairs, clutching her purse, looking terrified but determined. "I was there," June said, her voice trembling. "I was asked to come up as a witness because Brianna was having a panic attack, but when I got there, I heard them. I heard them say she had to sign or they would ruin her." A murmur rippled through the room. The Caldwell's perfect facade was cracking. "She is lying," Ethan shouted, stepping forward. "She is drunk, am I asked." I pulled my phone from my pocket. "Then explain this." I pressed play. The audio was clear, amplified by the silence of the room. Ethan's voice, cold and devoid of love, drifted over the crowd. "You will be the one to take the blame for the fund. You are an outsider. I cannot lose my name." I hit pause. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan looked as if he had been slapped. The guests looked at him with a mixture of horror and revulsion. I pointed to the gift box under the tree, the one I had opened earlier. The lid was askew. "Mr. Henderson," I said, addressing a guest I knew was a senior vice president at a regional bank. "You work in corporate compliance. That box under the tree contains a steel corporate seal for a shell company and a USB drive labeled with transfer logs. Is it legal for a private citizen to possess a corporate embossing seal at their home residence?" Mr. Henderson walked over to the tree. He knelt down and looked inside the box. When he stood up, his face was grave. "No. That is a controlled item. If that seal is for a company not registered to this address, possessing it is evidence of intent to commit fraud." "That is not ours," Marlene shrieked, her composure shattering completely. She planted it. "She is crazy. She has been seeing a therapist for months. She is delusional." "I am not delusional." "Marlene," I said. my voice cutting through her hysteria. And I can prove I did not plant anything or authorize any transfers. I held up my phone again, displaying the screenshot of the email I had sent to Northbridge. At 4:12 this afternoon, I reported a security breach to my company and locked my own access. I announced to the room, I have the confirmation from the IT department. If any money was moved, or if any documents were created using my name after that time, it was done without my permission. I created the timeline before the party even started. Pastor Miller stepped forward, his expression stern. Marlene, Grant, these are serious accusations. If there is a seal in that box. She is mentally unstable, Marlene screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is trying to destroy this family because she knows she never belonged. I looked at her, then at Ethan, who was cowering near the mantel, and finally at Grant, who was looking for an exit. I felt a strange sense of peace. The fear was gone. You are right, Marlene, I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. I never belonged, but you made a mistake. If you prepared me to be a criminal, then you must have also prepared a victim, and I am done playing that part. Grant did not waste time arguing. While the room buzzed with the shock of my revelation, he slipped toward the hallway and made a frantic phone call. Less than 5 minutes later, the front door opened, and 2 men in dark suits stepped inside. They were too bulky to be guests and too aggressive to be staff. They were private security, the kind wealthy men hired to handle problems that lawyers could not fix. One of them marched straight toward me. Ms. Hart, you are causing a disturbance. We have been asked to escort you off the property. Before I could respond, Ethan stepped between us. He held up his hands, his face twisted into a mask of desperate apology. Wait, Ethan said, his voice cracking with emotion. He turned to me, tears shining in his eyes. Brianna, please. Look at what is happening. We are destroying each other. Just come with me to the foyer. Just us. We can talk about this without the audience. Please, baby. I love you. For a second, the room held its breath. It was a compelling performance. He was offering me an olive branch, a way to de-escalate. If I refused, I would look like the aggressor. If I agreed, I would be separated from my witnesses. Okay, I said softly. Just to the foyer. Ethan exhaled, looking relieved. He put a hand on my back to guide me out of the living room. Marlene watched us go, a triumphant smirk touching her lips. She thought she had won. She thought they were going to get me isolated near the exit where the security guards could force me into a car. I walked with him, but I stopped abruptly right at the threshold of the front door. I positioned myself directly under the blinking blue light of the internal security camera, the same system I knew backed up to a cloud server I still had access to. We can talk here, I said. No. Outside, Ethan urged, his grip tightening on my arm. It is too loud here. I think here is fine. A sharp female voice cut in. The heavy front door swung open. Tessa Vaughn stood there, shaking snow off her wool coat. She did not look like a guest. She looked like a shark in high heels. I had sent her my location the moment I found the box. Who are you? Grant demanded, rushing into the foyer with the security guards behind him. I am Tessa Vaughn, attorney for Brianna Hart, she announced, her voice projecting clearly into the silent house. And as of this moment, all interactions with my client are being recorded for potential litigation. If anyone touches her, I will file assault charges before you can blink. Marlene pushed her way to the front. This is a private family dispute. You have no right to be here. Tessa reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stiff legal letter. This is not a dispute, Mrs. Caldwell. This is a preservation of evidence notice. We have reason to believe there has been an attempt to coerce my client into signing fraudulent financial instruments under duress. The room behind us was deadly silent. The guests were listening to every word. Suddenly, A chair scraped against the floor. Mr. Vance, a quiet man who sat on the board of the charity foundation, stood up. He looked pale, sweat beading on his forehead. I cannot do this anymore, Mr. Vance stammered. Sit down, Vance Grant barked, his eyes wide with panic. No, Mr. Vance shouted, his hands shaking. I am not going to jail for you. Grant, he made me sign off on those transfers. He has photos. He threatened to send them to my wife. The confession hit the room like a bomb. The dignified veneer of the Caldwell family disintegrated in an instant. Grant lost control. He lunged toward me, his face purple with rage, ignoring the lawyer and the guests. You ungrateful little witch, I brought you into this house. I gave you a life. I can make you disappear from this industry. Do you hear me? I will bury you. The threat echoed off the marble walls. Every person in the room heard it. The security camera above me recorded it. Tessa's phone recorded it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver USB drive I had taken from the box. I did not plug it in. I did not try to access the files. I simply set it down gently on the hallway table, right next to the bowl of peppermints. If this drive contains legitimate business records, Grant, then you have nothing to worry about, I said calmly. But if it is what I think it is, then I am happy to hand it directly to the federal investigators who handle corporate fraud. Grant signaled to the security guards. Cut the power. Get them out of here. Now one of the guards moved toward the breaker panel hidden behind a tapestry in the hallway. He yanked the lever down. The house plunged into darkness. Screams erupted from the living room. For a terrifying second, I thought this was it, the moment they would hurt me under the cover of blackness. Click buzz. Suddenly, the house was bathed in a stark, white glow. The emergency floodlights mounted in the ceiling corners flickered to life, illuminating the foyer with a brightness that was even more exposing than the chandeliers. What is going on? Ethan yelled, shielding his eyes. I looked at June, who was standing by the kitchen door. She gave me a tiny, trembling thumbs up. Her husband, Franklin, was an electrician. When I asked June to come over, I had asked if Franklin could check the old wiring for safety. He had bypassed the main breaker to the emergency backup system. You cannot hide anymore, I said, looking at Grant, who was now illuminated in the harsh, unforgiving light of his own failure. The lights stay on until the police get here. The wail of sirens cut through the winter air, drowning out the murmurs of the stunned guests. Grant looked triumphant for a split second, assuming his security team had summoned the authorities to remove me. But when the front door swung open, it was not a private patrol. It was the county police, and they were not looking at me. They were looking at Tessa. Officer, over here, Tessa called out, her voice cutting through the tension. I requested a welfare check and immediate preservation of evidence regarding a financial crime in progress. The officers stepped into the foyer, their boots heavy on the marble floor. The harsh emergency lighting made everyone look pale and guilty. But I stood tall. One of the officers, a sergeant with weary eyes, pointed to the table where I had placed the steel seal and the drive. Who owns this corporate seal? The sergeant asked. Before Grant could spin a lie, Mr. Henderson, the banker, stepped forward. Officer, that is a controlled embossing device for a shell entity. I can testify that I saw it removed from a hidden box intended to be planted on Ms. Hart. She is the criminal, Grant screamed, spit flying from his lips as he pointed a trembling finger at me. She embezzled funds. We have the records. I did not scream back. I simply handed the sergeant my phone. Officer, here is a time-stamped email from 4:12 this afternoon, locking my own access due to security concerns. And here, I held up the printed media plan I had swiped from the printer earlier, is a press release they wrote 3 days ago, detailing a crime that had not happened yet. If I stole the money today, how did they know to write this on Tuesday? The timeline was a steel cage, and Grant had just walked right into it. The police separated us instantly. They pulled Ethan into the kitchen for questioning away from his parents. Without Marlene there to whisper in his ear, without Grant there to bully him, my husband crumbled. Through the open doorway, I heard his voice crack, high and pathetic. I didn't want to do it, Ethan sobbed to the officer. Mom said if we got rid of her, the inheritance was mine. She said Brianna was the only thing standing between me and the trust fund. I just wanted the money. I closed my eyes. It was the truth I had known but hoped was wrong. He had sold me out not for love, not for loyalty, but for a paycheck. Marlene turned to me, her face streaked with mascara, her hands clasped in a begging motion. Brianna, please, we are family. You cannot let them take Grant. He has a heart condition. I looked at her, and then I delivered the final blow, the one secret I had kept even from Tessa until this moment. Actually, Marlene, you should be worried about where you are going to live, I said, my voice steady and cold. In my risk assessment of Grant's shell companies last month, I noticed he defaulted on the private loan securing this estate. The bank put the note up for sale as a distressed asset 2 weeks ago. Grant's face went white. What I bought the debt. Grant, I said. I used my savings and a bridge loan to purchase the note. Technically, as of yesterday, I am the primary lion holder of this house. And considering the illegal activities taking place on the property, I will be exercising the foreclosure clause immediately. The silence that followed was louder than the sirens. I did not just have the evidence, I had the deed. Noel is a day for family. Marlene, I whispered, leaning in so only she could hear, but I am no longer your sacrifice. I am your landlord. The rest of the night was a blur of flashing lights and legal procedure. The police bagged the seal, the USB drive, and the coerced documents. Grant and Marlene were read their rights for attempted fraud and conspiracy. I did not stay to watch them be handcuffed. I did not need to see it. I walked out of the house, got into my car, and drove straight to Tessa's office. I signed the divorce petition at midnight, under the humming fluorescent lights of a conference room. I requested a full restraining order. There were no tears left to cry. I walked out into the parking lot. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world quiet and clean. In the distance, church bells rang out, marking the early hours of Christmas morning. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Ethan. I am sorry. I stared at the words. They meant nothing. I deleted the thread, blocked the number, and opened a new message to my mother. I am coming home. I typed. I saved myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Brianna's revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.